Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Foresight TV. I've got my friend Beth Mace. I can't even talk straight. It's really bad. Who is with NIC. And we just barely got to connect last week when we were in San Diego together. I got there late and it was awful, but she had so much. She's always like the most brilliant person to talk to in the industry. So we're going to jump into it here in just 1 second. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. Hey Beth, welcome.
Hi Steve, how are you? I love that opening.
Thank you. I do too. You know, we've been using it for, I don't know, almost 2 years now, and it still makes me smile every time. You know, and I don't know, I've never been able to figure it out, but my glasses are crooked. And I can't, maybe it's my head, or I don't know whether my ears are misbalanced or something, but I can't ever seem to get them straight. And so they got that captured.
Everyone tells me my head is always crooked, so I can see my head here now. I always seem to have a slant, so I'm going to try to straighten it out this time.
Yeah, it's always really hard, and I don't know, it's weird. I've got a big monitor I use when I'm at my desk like I am now, and particularly when it's just me on the big screen. My head looks huge, and it's really but it was really weird at Nick. I asked a question, and they were last week. I asked a question of one of the speakers, and they were videotaping it, but they just caught the back of my head, and so there's this big back of my bald head up about 10 feet tall on the big screen at the Nick conference. It was a little bit weird. So before we get started into it, we got a bunch of really cool stuff we're going to talk about. I just want to make one quick mention as part of our sponsorship agreement, and tell you about the Senior Living Executive Conference that is taking place in New Orleans. It is the official conference for Argentum. And if you use the code Foresight, you get $100 off. And who cannot use an extra $100, right?
Sign me up.
Great. So let's start with, what are we going to talk about? Let's start with the NORC study. You guys initially commissioned NORC, and you might talk a little bit about who NORC is, to do a study relative to COVID in senior living communities versus the general population. The first one was last year, I think, and then you've updated it this year. And so let's just talk a little bit about what you're finding and what it means.
Yeah, so NORC is it's NORC, or NORC, at the University of Chicago. And Nick has been working with NORC actually since 2019, when we did that first study on the forgotten middle. So they helped us lay that framework out pretty nicely. And right after COVID started, we wanted to do an analysis on what the impact of COVID has been on senior housing. And we really wanted to make sure that we differentiated it between senior housing and skilled nursing, because those often are conflated, especially by the media. So we wanted to distinguish that there was something different between skilled nursing and senior housing as it related to COVID. And so we did 2 studies. And the first study was done prior to the rollout of vaccines. So in that initial study, what we did show is that, not surprisingly, that as you moved up the care continuum, that the mortality rates associated with the COVID became higher, which I think makes sense, because we know that COVID affected the most older, frail adults more significantly than it did younger people. And since a lot of those people are living in skilled nursing and senior housing properties, it makes sense that as you move up an acuity scale, that would be most affected. So we did show that there was a significant difference between skilled nursing and senior housing. And more specifically, we found that if you look specifically at IL, that IL settings were pretty comparable to similarly aged folks living in non-congregate settings. But the study had a few things that we could fix. One was that, again, this was before vaccines. So we wanted to take a look later on after vaccines to see what happened. We also wanted to make sure that we controlled for the differences in population, because in the first study, we didn't differentiate. You were just an older person that lived in the community at large, or you lived in senior housing, or you lived in skilled nursing. We wanted to differentiate that to take into account geographic differences We wanted to take into account demographic differences, and importantly, we wanted to take into account different conditions in your health. So we wanted to make sure that we were comparing apples and apples, so to speak, of a population of people that were similar in terms of whether they had certain types of health conditions, we'll say diabetes or COPD or something like that. So we could try to control for those conditions. And then we ran the analysis again before and after the vaccines were generated. And what we found was pretty significant, I think. And we also looked at excess deaths. So it wasn't just mortality, because there's a certain number of people that typically die, unfortunately, as you get older. So we wanted to control for that as well. So we created an excess death calculation. And from that, we found that people, first of all, that were in both periods, pre-vaccine and post-vaccines, that people that were in skilled nursing, unfortunately, did have higher excess death rates than did anyone who was in senior housing. And senior housing here is IL, AL, memory care, or CCRCs. And then we found once vaccines were in place, CCRCs were in fact safer than you would be if you were in the community at large. So that's a big finding. And we also found that for a similarly frail adult, older adult, in senior housing, IL and AL, compared to the community at large, that you weren't any worse off, or you were almost the same in terms of safety or in terms of excess deaths. And this was a pretty important finding, especially in light of the what I would call the value proposition of being in senior housing, which would include security, room and board, socialization, engagement, care coordination, wellness, and lifestyle, right? So that you were as safe as you would be if you were at home, but you had the added benefits of being in community. We know how important that socialization aspect of senior housing is. So that when you put it all together, it seems like this study really comes out as a pretty compelling case for wanting to move into senior housing. And we wanted to really dispel that notion that's in the media and that a lot of people perceive that, oh my gosh, you are worse off when you went into a congregate setting.
So there are a couple of things about this that are really interesting to me. One of the things I noted in the study was that something like 50% of the senior living communities reported no deaths at all from COVID. Is that, do I have that right?
That would have been in the first piece of the analysis that we did. We didn't have that kind of specific statistic out of the phase 2.
Because what occurs to me, so when I tend to look at these studies, what's really interesting to me is, what does this mean to me as an operator in terms of really two things? What does it teach me about how I can improve my operations to serve residents and team members better? And then the second thing is are there things here that I use as I do my messaging and I talk to communities? What I'm interested in, you may not have good information, but would be really interesting to explore, and of course it's where it gets a little bit scary or dicey, right, is there was quite a bit of variability. We saw it very publicly in the nursing home, where there were a few nursing homes that were outliers that had just massive numbers of deaths, where you'd have to assume that there are probably operational problems that caused that. Do you have any sense of what the variability is in terms of lots of deaths and not so many deaths? And maybe if there, were there like 10% that skewed it down or something like that?
I don't have that. If we might have that level of detail with the authors that did the study, so that's NORC, and we could always bring them on to the show. But the question to me was as important as that was really, well, why was this the case? And so, right. So a couple of explanations might be that senior housing vaccine availability and the distribution and uptake among residents and in congregate care settings, I think, was faster and earlier than if you were in the public at large, so to speak, because you remember that there were clinics that were set up in properties, right, so that you could get that vaccination pretty quickly. And of course, they were one of the first then to get it when we first came up with that vaccine. And God bless all those people that worked on that vaccine to get it out so quickly, right? And then the other part is that the NORC staff actually did some review of looking at Medicare Part B claims, and it showed that a greater proportion of seniors received their initial vaccine dose in January and February, prior to everything, and that would explain some. And then earlier rollout might have actually led to a return to socialization for independent living cohort,
Yeah.
stress reduction among those receiving vaccines. And that could have, in fact, had some protective impact on risk factors such as isolation or loneliness, potentially. We don't know that. There needs to be more work on that. But because people were, to this day, when I'm around older people, they're still getting a little anxious about COVID, and as they should be. But if you're in an environment where you were felt that your colleagues or your friends and your staff were getting vaccinated and you can feel safer, that could really positively affect your feelings about socializing. And we know that that has a big impact on people's overall well-being.
Yeah. So if you were an operator and looking at the results of the study, what would you do with the results? How would you use these results?
I think they're pretty positive results. So I guess I would market them in some way to
Okay.
take away that fear factor. Now, the only other aspect of that, honestly, there's like COVID fatigue, right? People are like, I don't want to talk
Yeah.
about this anymore. So there is that, because it took a while for us to get to this conclusion. So I think that some people are tired of hearing about this. But I do think it's important to talk about that, especially to new families coming into your property, to be able to say that there was this research that proves that, I don't want to be, half glass full, half full here, but you're not any worse off. I mean, in fact, you're the same, or plus you have the additional benefits of being in a senior housing property.
Yeah, and I think one of the things for me, the way I probably would use it is along the same lines of what you're talking about, is this idea that there are questions that people have that maybe they're afraid to even talk about, and that sometimes one of the things that salespeople can do is be very proactive. Is that, this may not be a problem for you. You may not be worried about this, but I know we've had questions about, COVID safety, because you've seen all these stories, and let me tell you what the real truth is. And so becomes really super valuable information. And I guess the other thing it would be is, if I were an operator, would be if I actually had excess deaths compared to the data that you showed, that it may be a good lesson that there are things we need.
Go back to
Opportunities
Youngin and
to get
figure
better,
out
right?
why. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other pretty neat thing about this research is that it was sort of foundational for new work that we're going to be doing this year. Specifically, we were able to use, I don't want to get too technical into the details, but we were able to use Medicare claims data and map it specifically to properties that NIC Map Vision tracks. And from that, we have 3 or 4 new research projects we're going to be doing this year for the public, and NORC is going to be working on that. One is we're going to try to assess and create a frailty index at a property level.
Great.
So Harvard University has come up with a methodology, the researchers there, on how to actually, using the Medicare claims data, picking different types of conditions or different types of prescriptions that are given to you to give you a concept of frailty. So we'll be able to build off of that and then apply that at the property level to come up with sort of an ADL measure. So this frailty index will serve as like an ADL, an activities of daily living measurement, which I think will be really important, because we don't have a sense of frailty or lack thereof within senior housing properties. And we also know from prior research that we did in the first phase of this study that we know that residents of senior housing and skilled nursing, for example, have over a dozen chronic conditions. We know that behavioral health conditions are really common, affecting residents across all settings. And we also know that residents use a lot of high-cost healthcare services, such as ER and acute hospital stays. So built off of that data, that's going to allow us to go through and to start to create this, what I call frailty index, or ADL measure, as well as we're going to be able to do research looking at the benefits, potentially, of living in a housing properties. Do you go less or more often to an ER or to a hospital? So I don't know what the results of that will be, but that could be pretty informative. We're going to look at a longevity measure. If you live in a senior housing property, are you more likely to live longer and healthier or not? And again, I don't know what the results will be, but this data now, we can make this connection between the data that CMS collects for Medicare and the data that NIC is collecting, or NIC Map Vision is collecting at the property level. So it's pretty exciting research that we're doing.
I've got my juices flowing already. I mean, the idea that you can actually look at the longevity. I think that one of the areas that a few people have actually spent some time looking at, like Juniper Communities, has been the increase in longevity. And I would love to see more senior living communities and maybe there's some others who are doing this, but to actually benchmark it and say, this year uh, on average, our length of stay for assisted living or for memory care or independent living was, 22 months. And so we're going to get it to 22 months and 2 weeks or 23 months. And economically, those are actually really big. A month increase in length of stay is actually economically huge, right?
Exactly right. So yeah, so definitely the operators would like to see this, but also, as a resident, if there's an added safety measure that you would get by moving into a senior housing property, that would be a pretty strong endorsement for wanting to move in, right?
You bet. No question about it. So what else? You were sort of on stage a lot at the conference in San Diego. This is like, my heart is breaking. I'm going to go back and watch some of the videos because I heard so many good things, and I got there late because I was at the Granger Cobb Institute. And so I didn't get many of the programs. What else were you talking about? What else are you hearing? What should operators be thinking about?
Well, a couple things. So Nick is starting a new, what we call a 5-year strategic plan. And through that, there's 5 initiatives, and a couple, the one I just was talking about really is talking more about partnering with healthcare and figuring out what the benefits of that would be. So that's one area that we're working on a partner project. Another, of course, is my favorite topic, which is middle market. So we're doing more work on middle market. And in fact, we had a small working group come together to talk about what's the next step for middle market. How can we create actual case studies on how to proceed with middle market? In fact, in Wednesday's Wall Street Journal, there was a story by Peter Grant, who picked up on middle market and was talking about some case studies in that and how to proceed forward. So we're pretty excited about that. It sort of got a little backtracked because of COVID, but we're excited to bring middle market and the theme and to get people excited about it. And the fact that it was in the journal was really exciting to me because maybe it's going to spread the word to a bigger audience than just our sort of community of senior housing. So that was exciting to me. In general, there's certainly some challenges facing our industry. First we were hit with labor shortages that still haven't completely gone away. Then we've had certainly the pandemic, and we seem to be through the worst of that. And kudos to all the operators and capital providers and the staff who helped bring us through all that. That was an amazing story in hindsight. And now we've had inflation. I'm an economist, so I have to talk a little bit about some of the economic drivers. So inflation, and now we have what the Fed's doing in monetary policy of trying to increase interest rates. So I think all of those are challenges. And for those operators that have had, or capital providers that have adjustable rate mortgages, the increase in interest rates right now is challenging to cover through your debt service. And you're also squeezed in your overall expenses. So I think, squeezed NOI is a challenge for our industry right now. So we did have a session actually on how we can start to, how do you build additional revenues to be able to help with the margins. And there were a couple sessions on that were exciting that you can go back and you can listen to. So that was certainly one theme that happened, one topic. And as I said, increasingly we're paying attention to how do you incorporate healthcare into the senior housing environment. So we spent, in fact, that was the theme of the overall conference, because as we know that our residents have gotten higher levels of acuity than they had since the GFC. And so how do we address that? So that's, I think, a really important topic as well. I also like to point out the sort of the maturity of the sector. Almost like hotels. And hotels, we have like a Motel 6 up to the Ritz, so to speak. And we're starting to see that in our industry too. You have the really high uber end, uber wealthy, expensive properties popping up in New York, San Francisco, and in Washington, D.C. But we're really addressing in the middle market too right now. And the lowest income residents, of course, have helped through Medicaid. So that we're seeing this wide segmentation and maturation in the sector. And I think that's pretty exciting for all of us, because you can sort of cherry pick where you want to be and where you want to play and what kind of strategies you need for that. And then, in general, I think, I keep going back to the value proposition for senior housing. And I think that I continue to say that we don't get our message out well enough. So that would, the value proposition to me again is socialization, engagement, fighting off loneliness, security, just simple board and care and room and board, and increasingly wellness. So that's a theme that we saw at our conference as well, was the so-called wellness revolution. And I know Lynn Katzman and a lot of other folks have been talking about this, but I think that that's a value proposition that will really appeal to baby boomers. If I go into senior housing, I can maybe extend my life, maybe increase the quality of my life, maybe, have fun at the same time, and importantly, purpose. So I think that that's part of the value proposition that we're starting to see as well, is purpose and engagement with each other. And yeah, so I think there's a lot of things to be looking forward to and exciting about our sector, as well as some of the challenges that can't be overlooked in addition.
Well, it's really interesting to me. I wrote an article I'm actually reading a fascinating book called Quit. And I'm going to go off on a little tangent and talk about this. Actually, I want to hit one other thing is that Jody Guffey asked if we can get a link up to the NORC study. I assume it's on the
absolutely. Go over to www.nic.org, nic.org, and you'll see it there. You'll see it coming across. Oh, yeah. That's fast.
Perfect.
So yeah, so go there.
Thank you, Jada, for doing that from behind. Yeah. So anyway, so it's that we'll drop a link in into the comments or in after we're done here as well. But one of the things this book Quit. So we, if you remember several years ago, I guess actually it's been close to 10 years ago, there was a book that came out called Grit by Angela Duckworth, and it was all about having grit and hanging in there. But this book sort of makes the point that quitting is sometimes a better option. So one of the examples they use is that if you were to go climb Mount Everest, something I sort of dream of doing, but I don't think I ever will. They have a rule on the day that you go do your summit that if at 1:00 in the afternoon, you're not on the summit, you have to turn around. Because if you don't turn around, it's a kill criteria. If you don't turn around, you will die on the mountain. And so as I'm thinking about this, and I'm looking through all these things, and it sort of gets me started. There's just a bunch of articles coming out of it. But one of the things that I got to thinking about is really the senior living problem should be only price. Now, it's interesting. I didn't realize it, but 97% of all Americans own a cell phone. And 85% of all Americans own smartphones. And the numbers for people who are age 65 are not that much better. Could we make senior living, you're thinking, where am I going? So my question is can we make senior living as ubiquitous as cell phones and smartphones for older people, where it becomes the thing that everybody has to do if you can possibly figure it out?
Well, I'm not sure about that, but if I look at the penetration rate for senior housing right now among 75 plus households, it's 11%, right? So where are those other 89% of people living? And there's lots of options. A lot of people prefer to live at home. We keep seeing that result, but the option isn't going to be there for everybody to live at home. In the middle market study, we found that 60% of middle income seniors are going to have mobility issues, for example. So you can retrofit your house to some degree, but at some point you're going to need some type of more congregate setting. So I think that you'll see the penetration rate go up for senior housing as time goes on, but I will never be 100% ubiquitous. There's a price point to it for sure, and simply we don't have the infrastructure and the labor in place to take care of that right now either, Steve. I don't think. But
yeah,
I think you're going to see some really clever things as people get older, as the baby boomers really start to move into this cohort. I think you're going to see more co-housing. I think you're going to see golden girls type living situations of women taking care of women or men taking care of men. You're going to see, I think, intergenerational housing take hold, that I have a house, but I can't do the chores in my house anymore. So I'm going to bring in a couple of younger people who pay less rent or no rent and can take care of the house and take care of me and go grocery shopping. So I think there'll be a lot of different innovative ways that will be approached, because the demographics are just such that there's fewer children to take care of older people just because of the way the demographics are in the US as well as in Europe and in China and other countries as well. And the higher divorce rates too. So you don't have children, you don't have a
Yeah.
spouse, and maybe you have friends. If you're lucky, you have a lot of friends. But nevertheless, I think there's going to be demand drivers that are going to push and going to cause that penetration rate to go up in our industry.
Yeah, I continue to be in sort of not in really in the NIC purview, but I tend to continue to be a big fan of sort of the small house model. Few weeks ago, we published. I did a keynote in Arkansas just before Thanksgiving, the week before Thanksgiving, and there's a guy down there that has a company called Three Beds, and they have this quirk in the law where they can actually do 3-bed board and cares, and there are no regulations or anything. They just go out and they charge money, and they have somebody who sleeps there, and they can do whatever they are comfortable doing and doesn't violate other laws is fine. And my mom spent her last 8 months in a 6-bed here in California, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I've talked to had several other friends who couldn't afford traditional sort of high level senior living that we see in our area, but could afford a 6-bed. So I think you're right. I think there are just going to be lots and lots of options. And I think the socialization a part of it is the one area we're kind of still missing the boat on. They tend to be the life enrichment folks tend to be the lowest paid part of the leadership team in every single community. And really, it's the one thing that makes senior living unique. It's the one thing that you can't get at
So
home.
yeah, so there's a project here that just broke ground. I went to it on Monday here. It's with a group called Two Life Communities, and the number two, and then Life Communities. And Amy Scheckman is the president and CEO there. And as they haven't opened yet, so they're just breaking ground. It's middle market, totally middle market. And as part of that plan there, you have to, when you sign up, you have to say you're willing to volunteer for 10 hours a month. So when she put that out there, people were like, that's never going to work. Nobody's going to like that. Well, in fact, it has been a driver of people wanting to go there because they want to be with people that want to be part of a community, and they also want purpose. So it's like a win-win-win on all levels, that you have purpose, you get to know people, you get to do what you like to do, and it also helps, of course, with labor. So, and we have a labor shortage issue. So, I think we're going to see more and more innovative and interesting ideas like that happen.
Yeah, I've got to get to Amy and talk to her. She makes me nervous, or I make her nervous. I don't remember which. She wrote the most awful, brutal article about me. You can still find it someplace in our archives when she disagreed with me something. Yeah, it was. I've talked to her since, and we had very friendly conversations. I saw her a year or so ago at a conference, but that's my kind of person, right? So
well, I had to tell you, it was really fun. I went to the groundbreaking, and it was just so enthusiastic, and just to get, it was shocking. Shocking. I guess the number of people that you had to get together to be able to get through the zoning, to get through this permission, and get through that permission, and get this, and then you had to have the building and architecture people there. And I mean, it's a project. You have to be able to really be well coordinated and have perseverance to get these projects done. But she's done it so far.
That's cool. I'm glad you actually brought that up, because I'm gonna reach out to her. I'd love to have her come on and talk to her. There was a guy out of Silicon Valley, a tech entrepreneur who had actually planned on doing a community like that up in the Napa Valley that was going to require 10 hours a week or 10 hours a month, 20 hours a month, something like that as part of the resident agreement. It never got built, and so I don't know what happened to that guy. But I think there are so many creative ideas. One of the other things I actually want to touch bases with you. We're almost out of time. I knew this was going to be a problem. Talk to me a little bit about occupancy and where we're at.
Yeah. So, I'd say actually there's a couple factors on a positive side as tailwinds, so to speak, on occupancy. On the supply side, the number of senior housing units under construction in the fourth quarter of 2022, which is the most recent data we have, was the fewest since 2015. It's not to say there's not construction underway, because there certainly is. And we saw inventory for senior housing increase about 6% since pre-COVID. So there's definitely supply coming, but it's not at the rates that we saw, a decade ago. So that's a good tailwind. And then the other thing, demand is strong. If you just look at the sheer number of units that are occupied right now, Demand is the most number of units ever occupied in senior housing. So the reason the occupancy rate's not back is because we had new competition, new completions coming, new inventory. But the actual demand is pretty strong. So there was certainly some pent-up demand related to COVID, but it seems to be continuing. So, the value proposition of our industry is still out there. I mean, you wouldn't have the most number of units filled otherwise. So I view both of those as positive factors helping us sort of navigate some of the other challenges that we might see in 2023.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that there are a couple of factors that are really encouraging to me. Going into the end of the year, and actually even early this year, I spent quite a bit of time in community. I've stayed at a couple of communities. My goal, by the way, if there are conferences happening and I'm going to be there and you want to offer me a guest room to come stay in your community for a few days, I would love to do that and talk to residents. Because one of the things I love is residents are mostly pretty happy with their senior living experience. And they're fairly realistic. I wrote about a story, so I won't go to details with it, but I had dinner with a group of residents and they had some fairly significant frustrations in their particular community. And yet they weren't ready to move out. They just wanted to make it better and they wanted to be a part of making it better. And so I think sometimes we get into this situation where we get all negative about what we do. And I think the satisfaction level is actually quite high.
Yeah, no,
have you guys looked at that at all?
I haven't looked at that in a while, honestly, but I do know that it used to be pretty common that people would say, "Gee, I wish I'd done this sooner." So that sort of speaks to the other last little comment I want to have, Steve, with you is just that one of the themes out of the conference and that we're seeing increasingly is the value of partnerships, and that acknowledgement that you necessarily can't all do it on your own. So work with other groups in the community or work with certainly partnerships in the healthcare arena, working with MA plans, things like that. But again, back in Amy's case, she's working with like local restaurants to be able to get economies of scale to bring meals in a couple nights a week, or working with healthcare providers or just overall care practitioners to come in and to help and doing it up like in chunks of time as opposed to like 4-hour blocks. So there's lots of things that I think that's going to be a theme as we go forward as well, is that partnerships are good. And be it with healthcare, or be it with care providers, or be it with restaurants, or be it with your staff themselves, to just take into account that sometimes it takes a village.
Well, the other thing that I heard was that there were a whole bunch of health plan people there. And so clearly what I think one of the big shifts in the industry right now that's huge for people who are sophisticated enough to do this is that the health plans are actually realizing that maybe senior living can bring some benefits to them and provide for their members at a much lower cost. And that it just is so exciting. I'm working on a big project that we're going to announce, I think, in 2 weeks. But I've been talking to a bunch of C-suite people about this project. And one of the big themes I hear coming out is this idea that senior living knows how to care for older people better than any other sector, including the hospitals. And that there needs to be a way for that connection to take place that would benefit economically the operators while benefiting the healthcare systems, the payer systems, and benefiting the residents. So I just think we're in a really exciting time.
So that was a big theme of our conference in San Diego, was the idea of working with healthcare providers and figuring out how to. I mean, senior housing operators have a captive audience, right? We have residents. Right. We have some. You've heard of social determinants of health. Well, senior housing definitely is a key driver of social determinants of health. So if you can extend the quality and the quantity of life for someone, that's a good thing for everybody. And if you can do that even better with having your health maintained by working with a healthcare provider, that's I think a win-win for all, right? And ultimately, as I said, the study we're doing with NORC is to see if we can reduce the number of times that people go to the hospitals for acute settings or go to ERs. And if we can reduce that, we can save the whole system a lot of dollars in the end.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that, I mean, I guess the thing that is hard is that we know our healthcare system is massively inefficient. We have the most expensive healthcare system in the world and not the best outcome. So we know there are rooms for improvement. It's just really hard to do because it's going to mean there are going to be people out there who are making lots of money who are not going to make lots of money anymore, and they're going to fight to hold on to that money, even if it's not in society's best interest. And so it's painful to get there, but I think we're moving in the right direction.
I totally agree.
So anyway, Beth, thank you very much. I do want to make one quick mention there. We had several conversations about quality of life and socialization. And so I'm going to do a little plug for us. Jada, do we have that as a banner up? We have just announced that we are our third annual Evolve Conference for Life Enrichment. It's all virtual, which means it is just stinkingly cheap right now. Tickets have just gone on sale, and they will never be cheaper than they are right now. This is something that you should attend as a leader, and more importantly, you should send your people to, because they will be inspired to do bigger, better things. And when people love senior living, your buildings are fuller, they require less staffing, and all those things that we talked about get better. So I would really recommend, you can find it on our website, but that's the direct link to it. And we'd love to have you or your people join us in July. Beth, thank you very much. This has been a terrific conversation. If you just hang on for a second after we sign off, I so appreciate your wisdom. You know, you're one of those people that makes our industry better, which means that you're making the lives of people who live and work in better. And I just appreciate that so much. It really is amazing. And then I want to also say thanks to Jada, who's in the background making all this stuff happen and making the show better. And I really, really appreciate what you're doing is with that. And so by the way, one more other thing I want to say is next week, you've got to join us. I don't know whether you guys know this. It'll be one of the hardest Foresight TV episodes we've ever done. I don't even know if you know this, but there was a massive serial killer in senior living communities in Dallas who killed at least 22 people, and they think as many as 30. The good news is the guy is in 2 life sentences in prison. He'll never get out to do this again. But there are some lessons to learn. We're going to be talking to the daughters of 3 of these residents next week about lessons learned. We want to hear their stories. And so it's going to be a really important show to join, to be there. It won't be the happiest one we've ever did, frankly, but it's an important story to hear. And with that, I hope you have, I know this is really depressing. And then I say that, and then I say, I hope you have a great weekend, right? So I do hope you have a great weekend, and we will be back next week.